Your husband was a coward who got himself killed playing hero. Now get off my property before I call the cops." Those words came from Richard Santiago, my brother-in-law, speaking about my dead husband Miguel, a Medal of Honor recipient who died saving 7 lives in Afghanistan. But Richard didn't know I was recording. He didn't know that inside my car, those 7 men, the ones Miguel died saving, were listening to every word. And he definitely didn't know that the cops he threatened to call were about to arrest him for stealing nearly $1 million from Gold Star families. This is how we destroyed him. But what happened next? Nobody saw coming. And if stories like this matter to you, if you believe heroes deserve justice, hit that subscribe button now because you won't want to miss what happens next. My name is Maria Santiago. Before I tell you how we brought down a monster, you need to understand what we lost. Miguel wasn't just my husband, he was Richard's younger brother. The kid Richard taught to throw a football when Miguel was 8. The man who looked up to him his entire life, even when their paths couldn't have been more different. Miguel chose service. At 19, he enlisted in the army. By 26, he was Staff Sergeant Miguel Santiago, leading men through the deadliest regions of Afghanistan. Richard chose shortcuts. While Miguel was dodging bullets, Richard was climbing corporate ladders, cutting corners, and building what looked like success from the outside. On October 15, 2019, in Afghanistan's Helmand province, the temperature hit 120 degrees. Staff Sergeant Miguel Santiago was leading a 7-man patrol through Taliban territory when he spotted the ambush waiting ahead. 30 Taliban fighters positioned in a perfect kill zone, with his brothers walking straight into death. What happened next would earn Miguel the Medal of Honor and cost him his life. Staff Sergeant Marcus Jackson, the squad's medic and one of the men Miguel saved, later told me exactly what he witnessed that day. Miguel didn't hesitate for even a second. He shoved Jackson behind a rock, grabbed his rifle, and stepped directly into the enemy's line of fire. For 17 minutes, he held off 30 fighters alone. Every bullet meant for his unit hit him instead. 1 American soldier against 30 enemies, drawing their fire to himself so his brothers could find cover and call for support. He kept fighting even after the first bullet tore through his shoulder, even after the second shattered his leg, even after the third found his chest and he knew he wasn't going home. His last words, whispered to Staff Sergeant Jackson as helicopters finally arrived, were simple. "Tell Maria I kept my promise." The promise he'd made at our wedding 3 years earlier, to always protect his brothers. 7 men came home to their families that day because Miguel Santiago decided their lives were worth more than his own. The Medal of Honor citation calls it conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. Richard would later call it cowardice. 6 months after Miguel's funeral, April 2020, I was drowning in paperwork. Death gratuity forms, survivor benefits, life insurance payouts, each document a reminder that my husband was never coming home. "Let me handle all the paperwork," Richard said, placing his hand on my shoulder. "You shouldn't deal with bureaucracy while you're grieving." I was grateful. Richard set up investment accounts, managed the benefits, and sent me monthly payments from Miguel's money, $2,000 a month, just enough to survive, never enough to thrive. "The investments aren't performing well in this economy," he'd explain whenever I asked about accessing more funds. "But don't worry, I'm protecting Miguel's legacy." While I clipped coupons and chose between groceries and gas, Richard was living very differently. He bought an $600,000 house with marble columns and a circular driveway, a $60,000 BMW, monthly gambling trips to Vegas, throwing around cash like confetti. But here's the truly sick part. Richard was using Miguel's story to build his reputation with other military families. "My own brother died a hero," he'd tell other grieving families at funerals. "I understand your pain. Let me help manage your benefits so you can focus on healing." 13. Gold Star families trusted him with their loved ones' death benefits. 13 families who'd lost sons, daughters, husbands, and fathers in service to our country. Richard's company, Heroes Legacy Financial, systematically drained every account. $1.2 million total, stolen from America's fallen heroes. But Richard made one crucial mistake. In March 2022, Richard was drunk at a high-stakes poker table in Las Vegas when he started bragging to other players about his business model. "Dead soldiers are the best clients," he laughed, chips scattered in front of him. "They don't ask questions and their families are too emotional to think straight. I've made almost $1 million off my own dead brother alone." He didn't notice the woman at the next table. Sarah Jackson, wife of Staff Sergeant Marcus Jackson, the medic Miguel had saved. 2 days later, my phone rang. "Maria, this is Jackson, Miguel's medic. We need to talk, all of us, tonight." His voice was shaking with rage. Within 6 hours, 7 combat veterans had gathered in my small apartment. These weren't just any soldiers. These were Miguel's brothers, the men who'd watched him die protecting them. They brought backup, a forensic accountant, a military lawyer, and evidence that made my blood run cold. What they'd discovered wasn't just theft, it was systematic predation on military families. Staff Sergeant Jackson, the medic who'd held Miguel as he died, had spent 2 years tracking Richard's movements. Sergeant Rodriguez, our explosives expert, had mapped every fraudulent transaction. Sergeant Thompson, who'd lost his leg to the same IED Miguel had pushed Jackson away from, had documented everything with legal precision. "We've been building this case like a military operation," Thompson explained, spreading documents across my kitchen table. "Richard stole $1.2 million from 13 families, but that's just what we can prove." The FBI Financial Crimes Unit had been investigating similar veteran exploitation schemes. When Jackson contacted them with evidence, they immediately opened a federal investigation. "Here's what's going to happen," said Agent Martinez, the lead investigator. "We're going to give Richard one chance to confess. If he cooperates, maybe we can work out a deal." "And if he doesn't?" I asked. 7 pairs of eyes that had seen war, death, and betrayal, looked at me with military determination. "Then we show him what happens when you steal from heroes." 1 week later, the house on Elm Street stood like a monument to greed. Every marble column and manicured hedge paid for with my husband's blood money. I wore the FBI wire-like armor under my jacket. In my car, parked across the street, 7 combat veterans listened through headphones while federal agents monitored from a surveillance van 2 blocks away. The plan was simple. Give Richard one last chance to confess. Appeal to whatever family loyalty might remain in his heart. Richard answered the door in golf clothes, a gold watch glinting on his wrist. Not a care in the world. "Maria, what a surprise. What brings you by?" "I need to talk about Miguel's benefits, Richard. About where the money really went." His fake smile vanished instantly. The mask slipped. "What are you talking about?" "I know about the 13 families, the gambling, all of it." That's when he said the words that sealed his fate. "Your husband was a coward who got himself killed playing hero. Now get off my property before I call the cops." In the car, I heard Rodriguez punch the dashboard. Thompson curse under his breath. Jackson's breathing went sharp and military-focused, but I wasn't finished. "Miguel was worth 100 of you," I said quietly. Richard actually laughed. "Worth? He's worth exactly $847,000 to me. Dead soldiers make the best clients. They don't ask questions." That's when I smiled, because 7 black SUVs were pulling into his circular driveway. Federal agents in tactical gear, FBI vehicles, and 7 combat veterans who looked ready for war. The neighbors came out to watch, kids on bicycles, soccer moms, all witnessing justice coming for the man who'd stolen from America's heroes. "Richard Santiago," the lead FBI agent announced, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, theft of government benefits, and violation of Federal Veterans Protection Acts." As they cuffed him, Staff Sergeant Jackson stepped forward, this man who'd carried shrapnel in his leg because Miguel had pushed him away from an IED. "That coward you mentioned. He carried me 2 miles through enemy fire with 3 bullets in him. He died holding a photo of his wife. He was the best man any of us ever knew." 8 months later, the federal courthouse in Dallas became a battlefield between truth and greed. On one side sat Richard and his expensive lawyers, claiming he was just a poor investor who'd made unfortunate decisions. On the other side sat 13 Gold Star families and 7 combat veterans who refused to let a hero's memory be destroyed. The prosecution played the recording, Richard's voice echoing through the courtroom. "Your husband was a coward. Dead soldiers make the best clients." 3 jury members cried. The judge removed his glasses and stared in disbelief. One by one, 13 families described how Richard had preyed on their grief. A widow who lost her house because her mortgage money had been gambled away. Parents who couldn't afford their son's headstone because their death benefit had vanished into Richard's accounts. Children who couldn't attend college because their father's sacrifice had been converted into Richard's luxury lifestyle. But the most powerful testimony came from Miguel's unit. Staff Sergeant Santiago saved my life in Kandahar, Rodriguez testified, his burn scars visible in the courtroom lights. I'm alive to raise my daughter because Miguel Santiago was braver in one moment than most people are in their entire lives. When they showed the video of Richard calling Miguel a coward, the courtroom went silent. When they played him bragging about dead soldiers being good clients, several people left in disgust, guilty on all charges. The judge threw the book at him, 35 years in federal prison, full restitution to all families, asset forfeiture of everything he owned. But even that wasn't enough, because Richard Santiago was about to learn that federal prison has its own justice system. FCI Beaumont in Texas isn't just any federal prison. It houses white-collar criminals alongside violent offenders, including many veterans who'd served honorably before making the mistakes that landed them inside. More importantly, it's full of former servicemen, men who'd served honorably, made bad choices, and ended up incarcerated. But even they have a code. You don't steal from Gold Star families. You don't spit on the dead. You don't call heroes cowards. Within a week, Richard was in protective custody. Within a month, he'd been beaten 3 times. The guards looked the other way. The warden shrugged when his lawyers complained. Funny thing about federal prison, the warden told Richard's attorney. The inmates here include a lot of veterans. Your client's reputation preceded him. Richard spent 2 years in solitary, not for punishment, but for protection. 23 hours a day in an 8x10 cell with 1 hour of supervised exercise where other inmates would spit on him through the fence. But the real torture wasn't physical. It was psychological. Every day, surrounded by men who knew what real service meant. Men who'd made mistakes but had served with honor, versus a man who'd never served anything but himself. The breaking point came during year 3. Richard attempted suicide, hanging himself with bedsheets in his cell. The guards found him in time, but barely. "Why'd you cut him down?" another inmate asked the guard later. "Because dying's too easy," the guard replied. "Living with what he did, that's the real punishment." Prison psychiatrists said Richard was having a complete psychological breakdown. The man who'd lived in luxury was now terrified to leave his cell. He'd lost 40 pounds, developed a nervous stutter, and jumped at shadows. That's when something unexpected happened. A chaplain named Father Rodriguez, himself a former Marine, started visiting Richard weekly, not to offer comfort, but to force him to confront what he'd done. "Tell me about your brother," Father Rodriguez would say, "the real Miguel, not the one you stole from." Week after week, Richard was forced to remember. Miguel teaching him to ride a bike, Miguel looking up to him at family gatherings, Miguel calling him before deploying asking for advice, Miguel's funeral, where Richard had delivered a eulogy about heroism and sacrifice. "He loved you," Father Rodriguez said during one session. "Even after everything, even knowing what you'd become, he loved you. That's what real heroes do. They love even when it costs them everything." By year 5, Richard was a broken man, but something else was happening. He was starting to remember who he used to be before greed consumed him. That's when the letter arrived. From me. "Richard," it read, "Miguel's unit has something to show you. Something he wrote before he died. If you're ready to face the truth about your brother, the real truth, let me know." 3 days later, I sat across from Richard in the prison visiting room. The man who'd called my husband a coward now looked like a scarecrow, hollow-eyed, trembling, broken. I placed an envelope on the table. Miguel's handwriting on the outside, "For Richard, if something happens to me." Richard's hands shook as he opened it. "Brother," Miguel had written, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. I know we've grown apart. I know you think I'm naive for choosing service over success. But I want you to know something. I've never stopped looking up to you. You taught me to throw a football. You taught me to stand up to bullies. You taught me that being a man means protecting the people you love. I'm in Afghanistan because of those lessons. If I die here, I die trying to be the man you taught me to be. Take care of Maria. Take care of my brothers. Take care of each other. That's all any of us can do. Love, Miguel. Richard collapsed, sobbing like a child, doubled over in his prison uniform, crying for the brother he'd betrayed and the man he'd become. He forgave you before you even betrayed him, I said quietly. The question is, what are you going to do with that forgiveness? But here's what nobody expected, including me. Due to prison overcrowding and appeals from Father Rodriguez, Richard was granted early release after serving 12 years of his 35-year sentence, 12 years for stealing from 13 families. Miguel got death for saving 7 men. The system had failed us again. Before we could process what his release meant, Richard showed up at the small apartment where I now lived, in broad daylight, wearing a thrift store suit and carrying legal documents. I called the police. I called Miguel's unit. 7 combat veterans arrived within an hour, all looking ready for a different kind of war. But Richard didn't come to threaten or demand anything. He came to give everything away. I liquidated my remaining assets, my pension, everything, he said, pulling out documents with shaking hands. Full restitution plus interest for all 13 families, $1.4 million. Thompson studied the papers. This is real. He signed over everything he'll ever own. Why? Jackson demanded. Why now? Richard looked at each of us, the widow and the warriors his brother had died protecting. Because in prison, I met a Marine who'd lost both legs in Fallujah. When he found out who I was, he didn't beat me up like the others. He asked me one question. What did your brother die for? I couldn't answer, so he told me. Richard's voice cracked. He told me about Miguel, how he'd shared water with wounded Taliban fighters because he said suffering was suffering, how he'd carried enemy children to safety during firefights, how even his enemies respected him because honor recognizes honor. Tears streamed down Richard's face. That Marine said something that broke me. Your brother died believing in something bigger than himself. You lived for nothing bigger than your bank account. Which one of you was the real man? We could have taken the money and sent him away, told him his debt was paid and his conscience was clear. But Staff Sergeant Jackson, the medic who'd held Miguel as he died, said something that changed everything. Miguel didn't die so we could abandon the wounded, even when the wounded person is the one who wounded us. That day we made Richard an offer he didn't expect. Redemption through service, real service, the kind that costs everything and pays nothing. He could disappear with his guilt, or he could stay and earn his brother's forgiveness by living his brother's values. Richard chose to stay. The man who'd lived in luxury now sleeps on a cot in our transitional housing for homeless veterans. The man who'd worn gold watches now serves meals to the same population he once exploited. The man who'd called heroes cowards now listens to their stories every night. It wasn't easy. The veterans were brutal at first. Hey, hero killer, pass the salt. How's it feel to serve the people you stole from? Your brother's rolling in his grave. But slowly, something changed. Not forgiveness. Some wounds cut too deep for that. But acceptance. The grudging respect warriors give someone who can take punishment and keep standing. Rodriguez was the first to soften. You know why I don't hate you anymore? Because hating you was keeping me from healing. Miguel died to save us. I wasn't going to let you kill us with bitterness. Richard's real test came 2 years later when a copycat emerged. Trent Hawkins, using our story to legitimize his own veteran exploitation scheme. If the Santiago family can overcome their tragedy, we can help your family too, Hawkins told potential victims. 12 new families, $800,000 stolen. The same playbook Richard had perfected. The FBI wanted Richard to go undercover. Wire him up, get close to Hawkins, build the case from the inside. Absolutely not, Jackson said immediately. We don't work with traitors. But Richard spoke up. I'll do it, not for you, not for me, for those 12 families, for Miguel. The operation took 4 months. Richard gained Hawkins's trust by sharing techniques for targeting military families. But when Hawkins tried to recruit him for a bigger scheme, targeting a Gold Star mother whose son had died in the same unit as Miguel, Richard looked him in the eye and said, "That woman's son died next to my brother. Touch her money and I'll kill you myself." The arrest was swift. Richard's testimony provided the key evidence. Hawkins got 25 years with no possibility of parole. All 12 families got their money back with interest. "You did good," Jackson told Richard afterward. "Miguel would have done it better," Richard replied. "But maybe this is what he'd want me to do with whatever time I have left." Today, 15 years after that ambush in Afghanistan, Richard Santiago lives in a one-room apartment above our Veteran Services Center. He takes no salary, owns nothing but the clothes on his back and a photo of Miguel in his army uniform. Every morning at 5 a.m. he's in our kitchen preparing breakfast for homeless veterans. Every evening he's in our meeting rooms listening to combat stories and trauma confessions from men and women who've seen hell and somehow made it home. But the moment that changed everything came last month. A young man in marine dress blues walked into our center. Couldn't have been more than 19. "Sir," he said to Richard, coming to attention, "I'm Lance Corporal Miguel Santiago." Richard's blood, Miguel's legacy, standing before us in uniform. "I'm your great-nephew," the young Marine continued. "I enlisted because of Uncle Miguel's story, but I came here because of what you've built since. I want to serve." "Really serve?" Richard stared at this boy, this young man carrying the name of the brother he'd betrayed and spent 15 years trying to honor. "Do you know what your great-uncle's last words were?" Richard asked quietly. "Tell Maria I kept my promise," the young Marine replied. "Do you know what that promise was?" "To always protect his brothers." Richard nodded, tears in his eyes. "Then you understand the mission. It's not about the uniform or the medals or the glory. It's about this." He gestured around the room. Veterans playing pool, families sharing meals, people taking care of people. This is what he died for. 3 generations of Santiagos. One hero who gave everything. One traitor who lost everything and found redemption in service. One future warrior learning that true honor isn't inherited, it's earned through sacrifice. Richard was wrong when he said Miguel was worth $847,000. Staff Sergeant Miguel Santiago was worth the 2,000 lives we've saved from suicide, the 3,000 veterans we've housed, the 50,000 families we've helped heal, the 47 predators we've stopped from exploiting military families. He was worth the transformation of his own betrayer into his most dedicated servant. He was worth the next generation of warriors carrying his name into battle with honor. But most of all, he was worth proving that redemption is possible, even for those who seem beyond saving. That love can survive betrayal. That service can heal wounds that punishment cannot touch. Miguel gave his life believing his sacrifice would matter. 15 years later, we prove him right every single day. The heroes never really die. They just pass the watch to those they leave behind, and sometimes they even pass it to those who once betrayed them. If this story moved you, share it. Support veteran organizations in your community. Check on the military families you know, because somewhere tonight a veteran is fighting demons in the dark. A Gold Star family is struggling with loss. They need to know they're not alone. They need to know that Miguel's brothers, all of them, are still on watch. And if stories like this matter to you, stories about justice, redemption, and the price of betraying our heroes, hit that subscribe button right now. We're building a community here of people who believe that accountability matters, that heroes deserve better, and that sometimes the most broken people can find their way back to honor. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from.